For most of human history, being the apex predator was not a guarantee. It was a temporary, hard-won status that could be revoked in about 4 seconds by something with more mass, more teeth, and significantly less interest in negotiating. Long before cities, before agriculture, before anything resembling safety existed, early humans shared the landscape with animals so large that modern people would struggle to process them as real. Not metaphorically large. Structurally, mechanically larger, built on a different scale of force entirely. And every single one of them, at some point, ended a human life in a way that had absolutely nothing to do with malice and everything to do with mass, instinct, and physics. This is what that actually looked like. Consider the short-faced bear, a creature that once roamed parts of prehistoric North America, standing close to 6 feet at the shoulder on all fours and reaching heights of 11 or 12 feet when raised onto its hind legs. A modern grizzly, an animal that itself ends multiple human lives every year, would have been outweighed and outmatched. The short-faced bear's limb proportions suggest it wasn't built like a typical bear at all. It was built more like a long-distance pursuit predator, with the leg structure of an animal optimized to run down prey over open ground rather than simply ambush it. There was no outrunning something like that. There was no climbing away from it either, given the limb length involved. A human encountering this animal at close range wasn't facing a wrestling match. They were facing a fundamentally unequal application of force. A single forelimb strike from an animal of that mass carries enough kinetic energy to fracture bone through soft tissue without the limb itself even fully connecting. The body doesn't have time to register pain in any useful sequence. The nervous system simply reports catastrophic structural failure, all at once, everywhere. Then there's the American lion, distinct from and considerably larger than the modern African lion, estimated at up to 25% more mass than its modern relative. Predation behavior in big cats of this scale typically follows a specific mechanical pattern, a controlled approach to minimize detection, followed by an explosive final commitment covering the last several meters in under 2 seconds, ending in a bite directed at the throat or the base of the skull. The goal isn't prolonged combat, it's immediate incapacitation, because every second of resistance from prey increases the predator's own risk of injury. For a human target, this means the entire encounter, from the moment of detection to the moment of incapacitation, frequently occurred in a window shorter than it takes to read this sentence aloud. There was no extended chase sequence in the way modern imagination tends to picture. There was a gap of stillness, then an explosion of motion. Then it was already over before the rational decision-making part of the brain had produced a single usable plan. The mammoth presents an entirely different category of danger, not built on pursuit, but on sheer structural consequence. An adult mammoth could weigh in excess of 6 tons. The danger here wasn't claws or teeth. It was the simple, brutal mathematics of what happens when something 6 tons in mass needs to move, defend territory, or panic in close proximity to something built on the scale of a human body. A single dismissive sideways motion of a mammoth's head, an animal not even attacking with intent but simply reacting to a perceived threat or irritation, carries enough force to collapse a human ribcage, rupture internal organs, and displace a body several meters, all without the animal needing to apply anything resembling deliberate aggression. There are documented cases throughout history, even with modern domesticated and significantly smaller elephants, of fatal incidents occurring not through attack, but through what handlers describe as essentially incidental contact, an animal simply existing in motion near a human body that could not absorb the resulting force. Early human hunting strategies around megafauna like mammoths reflect a clear understanding of this risk calculation. Evidence suggests coordinated group tactics designed specifically to avoid close proximity entirely wherever possible. Driving animals toward natural hazards, using terrain to create separation, relying on thrown weapons rather than direct engagement. This wasn't caution born of fear alone. It was an accurate read of the actual physics involved. Direct, close-range confrontation with an animal of that mass was simply not survivable as a strategy, regardless of numbers, regardless of skill. The saber-toothed cat introduces a different mechanical horror entirely, built around a bite designed not for speed of killing, but for precision against very specific anatomical targets, primarily the throat and major arteries, using canine teeth that in some specimens exceeded 7 inches in length, including the root structure. This length created an unusual vulnerability for the animal itself. Those teeth were structurally less suited to the high-force, bone-crushing bite style of something like a modern lion, and more suited to a controlled, deliberate strike against soft tissue specifically. For a human being on the receiving end, this distinction meant very little in practical terms. The targeting was, if anything, more efficient. A strike to the throat from teeth of that length bypasses almost every survivable outcome simultaneously, severing airway and major blood vessels in the same motion. Documented forensic analysis of preserved specimens and associated fossil evidence has allowed researchers to reconstruct bite mechanics with enough precision to know that an encounter ending in a connected strike to that specific target zone was not survivable under any plausible prehistoric medical circumstance, because there was no prehistoric medical circumstance capable of addressing catastrophic vascular injury at all. What makes all this distinct from typical modern predator-related fear isn't simply the size of these animals, it's the complete absence of any recourse once an encounter began. There was no emergency response. There was no surgical intervention. There was, in the vast majority of cases, no possibility of meaningful resistance once the physics of the encounter had been set into motion. Because the disparity in raw mechanical force between a human body and something measured in tons, rather than pounds, doesn't leave room for technique or willpower to meaningfully intervene. This is part of why early human survival depended so heavily on detection and avoidance rather than confrontation. The entire skill set that allowed early humans to persist alongside these animals wasn't built around fighting them. It was built around an extraordinarily refined ability to notice the early, ambiguous signs of their presence. A particular pattern of disturbed vegetation, a specific quality of silence in an area that should have had ambient animal noise, a track depth and spacing inconsistent with anything smaller, and to alter course long before any direct encounter became possible. The humans who survived long enough to pass on those instincts were, almost without exception, the ones who never tested what these animals were actually capable of at close range. They simply never found out. What's left of all of this today is mostly bone, fossilized remains, isolated and largely silent about the specific final moments they represent. But the rare cases where forensic and paleontological evidence does intersect, embedded predator tooth fragments in prey remains, skeletal trauma patterns consistent with known bite mechanics, isolated human remains found in direct association with megafauna kill sites, offer enough to reconstruct with unsettling clarity exactly how fast and exactly how final these encounters were. There was no slow build, there was no negotiation phase. There was simply a world where something extraordinarily large existed nearby, and then, in the span of a few seconds, that fact became the only thing that mattered. Have a happy day.